What's the problem with corn? Well, like wheat, corn is also a grass. What you think of as corn, that is corn on the cob or the cob of corn, is really the seed head of the corn plant. Now, the seed head of corn is bizarrely enlarged compared to other grasses, and that's because farmers and agricultural scientists have introduced thousands of mutations into the seed head to make it enlarge for a greater yield, particularly of the starch amylopectin. But if you compare modern corn to its ancestral form, teosint, you'll see that teosint is just like any other grass, and that's where modern corn came from. Well, what's the problem for us humans consuming corn? Well, first of all, corn occurs just about all different processed foods. It's become oddly ubiquitous. You can see it as cornstarch, cornmeal, maltodextrin, caramel coloring, maltitol, and literally dozens to hundreds of other ways corn has been introduced into the human diet. Well, we've seen problems with corn consumption over and over and over in the last several thousand years since humans have begun to consume corn. When humans overconsume corn, for instance, they get something called pellagra, which is a deficiency of vitamin B3 or niacin. This was seen many millions of times in earlier years. When people overconsume corn, they get a disease called pellagra, which is characterized by what doctors call the 4 Ds: diarrhea, dermatitis, dementia, and death. So it's a very serious illness if you become deficient in niacin from overconsumption of corn. And while this doesn't happen much in North America anymore, it still happens to a great degree in many people in South America, Asia, and Africa. So overconsumption of corn illustrates just how awful corn can be in destroying health and causing nutritional deficiencies. Because corn is rich in Amylopectin A, and farmers selected strains with greater Amylopectin A content. Amylopectin A, recall, is the carbohydrate that's worse than table sugar. And when you pulverize it into cornstarch or cornmeal, you increase the surface area for digestion. And that's why foods with cornstarch, like gluten-free foods, send blood sugar sky high. No other food raises blood sugar higher than cornstarch. So corn, the Amylopectin A of corn, is responsible for extravagantly high blood sugars. And those blood sugars are not benign. They have real consequences. High blood sugars cause high blood insulin, which over time leads to insulin resistance. That's the process that leads to type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. It causes growth of visceral fat, of deep inflammatory fat in the abdomen, the fat that encircles the intestines, liver, and kidneys, and other organs. And that alone has all sorts of implications, including hormonal distortions. And high blood glucoses from the Amylopectin A of corn also causes glycation, glucose modification of proteins. That's the process that leads to cataracts, arthritis, dementia, heart disease, cancer, and acceleration of aging because of the accumulation of advanced glycation end products, essentially debris in the various parts of the body. Consumption of corn, rich in Amylopectin A, accelerates tooth decay. This has been seen over and over and over again in populations who were not consuming corn, who then began to cultivate corn and eat the cob, developed explosive tooth decay. For instance, Native Americans, several thousand years ago, when they first learned to cultivate corn, experienced a dramatic downturn in dental health because of exposure to the Amylopectin A. This has been seen over and over again in populations throughout the world when they first begin to consume corn. Just like wheat consumption can lead to effects like iron deficiency, anemia, and stunted growth in children, so can corn consumption. Anemia, iron deficiency, and stunted growth in children. This likewise has been seen over and over again in various populations when they first turned to corn for consumption and for calories. Allergies are a problem with corn. We see this most vividly in the baking industry and pharmaceutical industry, where a lot of the components of pills, from prescription pills, contain cornstarch or other corn components. So people who are exposed to corn proteins over time, many of them develop allergies. They either have to wear masks and gloves or stop working in that industry altogether because there's so much allergy, suggesting that there's something wrong with the humans interacting with the proteins of corn. The zein protein of corn looks a lot like the gliadin protein of wheat within gluten, and it therefore means that a lot of the adverse effects provoked by gliadin can be mimicked by zein. For instance, people with celiac disease who should not consume anything with gliadin, people say gluten, but it's really the gliadin protein, can have their disease reactivated by exposure to the zein protein of corn. Likewise, other forms of gluten intolerance can be reactivated by exposure to the zein protein. And a lot of the other problems with provoked by the gliadin protein, such as the first step in generating autoimmune diseases. That is, the gliadin protein causes increased intestinal permeability that allows foreign substances entry into the bloodstream, and that's the process that begins autoimmunity. The zein protein can do the same thing, and it can lead to type 1 diabetes, for instance, or rheumatoid arthritis. And of course, now we have the problem of GMOs. Virtually all corn sold nowadays is genetically modified, meaning it contains glyphosate residues, the herbicide glyphosate, which is a carcinogen, an endocrine disruptive chemical, and it also has the Bt toxin. Bt toxin is an insecticide. The gene for Bt toxin production is inserted into the corn plant. When you consume the corn, it now produces Bt toxin. And when you consume it, you have glyphosate residues, Bt toxin, and it has been shown that even human bowel flora can incorporate that gene for Bt toxin, and human bowel flora can actually start expressing Bt toxin, this insecticide itself. So imagine the dramatic changes that can occur with exposure to both glyphosate and Bt toxin in your bowel flora. And then speaking of bowel flora, the Amylopectin A of corn also introduces changes in bowel flora beyond those of genetic modification. So the Amylopectin A encourages proliferation of unhealthy bowel flora species like Campylobacter, Shigella, and E. coli. It also invites bacteria from the colon not just to proliferate, but also to ascend up into the ileum, jejunum, duodenum, and stomach. That's called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Amylopectin A also encourages fungal overgrowth, and also, like bacteria, invites fungi to ascend into the upper GI tract. So SIBO and SIFO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, very common and encouraged by corn consumption because of the rich content of Amylopectin A. And once you develop SIBO or SIFO, that brings with a whole new range of consequences: autoimmune diseases, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. It makes ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease and celiac disease worse, and a whole host of other adverse consequences. So corn doesn't look like a grass, right? The seed head doesn't look like the seed head of other grasses, but that's because of the bizarre and extensive mutations introduced. But corn, whether you like it or not, is still a grass and still has all the consequences for humans who try to consume the seeds of grasses. If you'd like more conversations like this, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, or go to my Wheat Belly blog, Wheat Belly Facebook page, or my Undoctored blog, Undoctored Facebook page, as well as my Wheat Belly and Undoctored books.